What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Young Guns podcast. With the 2022-2023 season approaching very quickly, we're going to be talking about the most underrated teams heading into the season. But before we start, let's take a quick word for our sponsor, which is Bet99. So if you like fantasy hockey, football, or other casino games, you could sign up to Bet99. The link's in the description below. You can use our code YoungGuns1. You must be 19 years old and up to play, and you must play responsibly. Also, this video is also sponsored by the Mind Foundation Canada. They raise funds and awarenesses to find cures for neurological diseases and disorders. They're currently focused on mental health, so you guys could donate using the link in our description. So, starting with our first team, as you guys could see right here, the Anaheim Ducks. So, Trevor Zegras, yeah, he's currently injured, but he should be ready for the start of the season. He had a great rookie season last year. Didn't win the Calder, but he was nominated. They add Frank Vetrano. They add Ryan Strome. Mason McTavish is in the mix, and obviously on defense they have Klimberg, who's added,
Yeah,
and Dmitry Kulikov, and they also have a young guy in the name of Jamie Drysdale.
yeah. I think the Ducks are a really interesting team this year, and I think the reason why they're underrated is just because I think they've made some good moves in the offseason, that kind of went under the radar. They brought in a guy like Frank Vetrano, they brought in a guy like Ryan Strome. Mason McTavish is going to make the next step this year, and I think you've got a team that's a young team, but a team that's able to kind of compete. I'm not saying they're going to make the playoffs, but this is a team that is starting to build a foundation for themselves, right? Troy Terry last year broke out and had a really good year. Guys like Trevor Zegras are going to take another step forward this year. Mason McTavish is going to play a full year in the NHL. They're expecting more out of Maxim Comtois this year as well. You know, so these are guys that are all important parts of the Ducks, and I think that's why it makes them so underrated this season. Because as much as people look at it and kind of do what they have to do, the Pacific Division is not necessarily the best division, right? And so because of that, the Ducks may surprise some people and may squeak in to potentially a wild card spot, or just kind of outside of there, because they're not a bad team. I think they're a good team on paper. I think they've added to their defense a little bit more. They brought in a guy like John Klingberg, like Chris said, and they've upgraded in every aspect of their team. And I think their biggest question mark is going to be: is this team going to be consistent enough all season long to kind of impress people and surprise them? And I think last year the Ducks had a really good start to the year, and then kind of fell off towards the end of it. So let's hope that the Ducks can be consistent this season. If that's one criticism I had from them last year, it was the fact that they were inconsistent. So
Yeah, and I think with bringing in veterans like Vachano and Strom and Klimberg is gonna help guide the rookies. Essentially, last year we saw the wave of rookies taking over in Anaheim, and that it really helped gain recognition for the team, especially with Trevor Zegras, who was doing the
yeah.
Michigan, and he was everywhere. He's slowly creeping up as one of the best players in the league, and he's currently the face of the Anaheim Ducks. So this is a team to look out for this upcoming season. And where do you think they finish?
Like I said, I think they're a team that can maybe finish maybe not last in the Pacific, but I think a team that could finish maybe fifth or fourth in the Pacific, depending on how other teams go and stuff. But they're a team that I think is going to do a lot better than they were last year.
So they'll be pushing for a playoff spot. Now our next team, the New Jersey Devils. So this is a team where they have a good mix of youth and veteran presence. Jesper Bratt had a breakout year last year. Jack Hughes took a step forward. Eric Holla's in the mix. You have Dawson Mercer, who's supposed to take the next step forward. He had a good rookie season last year too. Thomas Tatar is there. They bring in Palat. Miles Wood is back. They have Andreas Johnson, McLeod, Bastion on the fourth line, Sharangovich as well in the top six, Nico Heischer. I think for this team, it's all about staying healthy. Dougie Hamilton also having to make a bounce back season this year. He didn't have the best season last year with the New Jersey Devils. They bring in John Marino as well. Their defense is really solid and overlooked in my opinion, and also in terms of their goaltending, bringing in Vitek Vanacek to help in Blackwood, which is going to be like a 1A 1B scenario for them. And looking at their penalty kill, looking at their power play, this is going to be an offensively minded team, but also they're going to be good defensively as well. So
And
I would assume that they're going to be competing for a playoff spot, but are they guaranteed a playoff spot? That's the main question.
well, I think one thing that we have to talk about with New Jersey, and I have some stats over here, so I just want to read out to you. Um, they finished 19th out of 32 in the NHL in goals forward. So that's, it's bottom of the league, but it's not that bad. 19th out of 32. Like they had 248 goals forward. This is a team that scored, you know, a decent amount of goals. Their problem was goaltending. 307. They were 29th in the NHL out of 32 teams for goals against. The issue was they played 7 goaltenders last year because of injuries and stuff like that. This is a team that, if healthy and have healthy goaltenders and can get half games from Vitek Vanacek and half and the other half with Mackenzie Blackwood, then I think they're a better team than a lot of people give them credit for. They've added guys like Alex Holtz, who I think this year is going to make the jump and play in the NHL. They've added guys like Simon Nemec, who they drafted this season. Jack Hughes is getting better. Nico Hischier is gonna take another step up this year. I think a guy like Thomas Tatar last year had a down year. I think he's a guy that potentially bounces back as well. And so they've added some really good players. Andre Palat is a guy that nobody that I completely forgot to mention, but he's another guy that 2-time Stanley Cup champion. He's going to bring some experience to that Tampa team, and I think they've done well. I think their top nine is one of the most underrated top nines in the NHL. And I think that they're a team that is going to be scary this season. And we're going to talk about another Metropolitan team afterwards, but I think that they're one of the teams that potentially challenges for a playoff spot and could give the big guns like the Tampa, like the Washingtons and the Pittsburghs, a good run for their money, I would say, this season. So
Yeah, and speaking of that other metropolitan team, we
yep,
have the Columbus Blue Jackets. Just give
yeah.
me a second here. Okay, yeah. Yeah,
So
this is a team that adds Johnny Gaudreau literally out of nowhere. Patrick Laine is supposed to benefit from this addition. You have a good mix again with youth and veteran presence. You have Gustav Nyquist, Jakub Voracek there to like keep down the fourth. You have Boone Jenner as their captain, but now you have Ken Johnson in the mix. You have Kirill Marchenko, who's gonna start the season with the team. Cole Sillinger as well. Eric Robertson, Sean Corrali,
there's
Mathieu Olivier. Jack Roslovich. This is a very young team, and you look at their defense. Zach Rowinski. I think he's gonna really benefit from this youthful team that is gonna generate a lot more offense. Bachvist in the mix, Jake Bean. The only thing that's kind of questionable is Eric Goodbranson, but look at their power play. It's good in my opinion. It's very balanced in the first unit and the second unit.
I I'm high on Columbus this season. I really am. And I know that people are going to say, "Oh, but they added Johnny Gaudreau and they didn't really do anything else." Sure, but here's the thing: you've added a guy like Johnny Gaudreau on a team that's super young, right? They've got Patty Laine over there, who had a really good year last year. They've got guys like Ken Johnson and Cole Sillinger, who I think are going to take step ups this year. Marchenko looks like a really interesting prospect. They also have that Igor Chinakov, who they drafted as well. He's had a really good preseason for Columbus. I could expect him to maybe make the lineup as well. For me, Columbus, it kind of begs the same question as New Jersey, but more so in the sense that this is a team that needs their decor to be healthy, and this is a team that needs good goaltending. We know what Elvis Merzlikins is capable of. The problem is not necessarily Elvis Merzlikins, it's their backup goaltending in Eunice Corpusalo. Corpusalo last year struggled mightily with the devil with the Jackets, and I think the reason for that is just because he didn't put up good numbers, and when he did get wins, they were a lot of big wins, like 5-4, 4-3 wins, and you know this is a guy who's competing with Danil Tarasov as the backup role, right? And this is a guy who was linked with trade rumors as well. I think Columbus this year is gonna need goaltending and good goaltending if they want to compete in this league. But I think they've got all the foundations to become a good team. I just think they've got to get consistent goaltending and
And in
and that's
terms
it.
of Marchenko, he actually got sent down, so my bad. So he will not be starting with the team. But I do, predict that he will get called up at some
Yeah.
point with injuries, and I think he will make an impact. So in my mind, he will be part of this roster at some point. So I
Um,
mean, I would add him in the mix regardless of him being sent down. Um, in terms of Columbus, like New Jersey, gonna be competing for a playoff spot. New Jersey and
Columbus.
The Columbus Blue Jackets, in my mind, are wild card teams. In terms of the Ducks, wild card team as well. So let's move on to our next team, which is a team in the Atlantic, a team that
Yep.
is ran by a legend of the Detroit Red Wings, Steve Yzerman. So looking at this team, man, like Lucas Raymond was fantastic last year. They're getting a Jakub Vrana that's going to be healthy. You're adding David Perron, who's so criminally underrated. Andrew Kopp to the mix. Philip Zadina, hopefully he bounces back. They add in Dominic Kubalik, who I think is going to have a bounce back season this year. Sunquist, Pius Suter, who they added from Chicago, who didn't have the best season last year, but maybe a lot of players on this team are poised to either break out or take the next step forward. And adding veterans like David Perron, Andrew Kopp is really going to help this team. And on defense, adding Ben Sherrod, with Maurice Sider, that's going to help their team defensively. Oli Mata into the mix, another veteran presence. But
Yep.
Simon Edvinson, and Philip Horonik, those are underrated defensemen, in my opinion, that have a high ceiling. Look at this power play, man. Like, how good is this power play? Like I
I
think it's
think
going to be top 10
I
in
think
the
with
upcoming season
Detroit,
if it works out.
Detroit, this is the year that I think Detroit takes that next step. And the reason I say that is just because I look at the Atlantic Division and I'm not impressed with the Atlantic Division this season. I'm really not. I don't think Florida's that good. I don't think Toronto's that good. And I think that in that case, a team like Detroit, they've made some really good moves. They acquired David Perron, like you said. They brought in
Billy
Pius. They
Huso
brought in
as a
some
goalie.
really they brought in some really good goaltenders, really good players, and really good goaltender in Ville Husso. That's my only concern with Detroit, and I know it's going to be a reoccurring trend. But is Ville Husso and is Alex Nedeljkovic going to be able to hold the fort for Detroit? Holy crap, New Jersey! I always get mixed up. Anyways, hold the fort for Detroit. I think they absolutely can, and I think with Detroit, this is the first time in a while that we've seen a very deep Detroit team. Um, Last year, they didn't score very many goals. They conceded a lot of goals. I think we're going to see a much better, more balanced Detroit team, who doesn't have Jeff Blashill as coach anymore. They've got a really good top nine. I like this team a lot. I really do. And I think they're going to compete with the likes of Boston and potentially even Florida for that final wild card spot in the Atlantic
Atlantic.
Division.
Well, in the East in general. But yeah, I think Detroit has the edge over a team like Columbus and New Jersey. I think those two teams are wild card teams. If anything, I think Detroit is actually going to finish third in the Atlantic. Um,
Really?
yeah, I mean, I'm very, very high on this team. Yzerman knows how to build a team. Look at the team he built in Tampa after he left. Bisbois, put in the final pieces to make that team a two-time Stanley Cup champion, back-to-back Stanley Cup champions, and going to a third consecutive final. So the pieces were laid. The foundation was literally laid before that by Yzerman. Now he's doing the same thing here. Having a 1A, 1B situation with Nedeljkovic and Huso, I think, is smart as well. I know people are not too crazy about the Ben Sherrod signing, but you need some veteran presence on that decor, and it's fairly young, and that's why they bring in Oli Mata as well. I think this team is going to surprise a lot of people, and again, hopefully Bertuzzi and Larkin stay healthy, and I'm expecting great things from this team. A lot of players that are candidates to be bounce back
Yeah.
players, like I said, in Zadina and Kubalik. So I'm expecting this team to finish, third in the Atlantic. And now moving on to another team, a team that surprised the hockey world last year and made the playoffs over teams like Vancouver, Winnipeg, and Vegas, the Los Angeles Kings. And a big part of their success was Trevor Moore having a breakout season and Philip Danault, continuing to impress people, but obviously showing that he has an offensive game to his game. It's not just defensive. So, looking at this team, fairly young, Quinton Byfield, Gabriel Velarde, they bring in goal scoring in Kevin Fiala. Um, I follow playing on the third line. That's pretty, deep when you look at their top six: Kempe, Kopitar, um, Dano, Moore, Fiala, Velarde, Kaliev, who I think is going to have a breakout season this year. Their fourth line, not the best, but, it is just a fourth line. Looking at their defense, Mikey Anderson, Jude Dowdy, Sean Walker, Matt Roy, Alexander Edler, Sean Dursey. And looking at their power play, pretty solid in my opinion. They had a lot of injuries last year, and I think if they stay healthy, this team will make the playoffs. And I
Yeah.
do think they're gonna finish third in their respective division, um, like they did last year. I see them finishing in the same spot like they did last year in their standings.
I think LA. What I
Oh,
like
Victor
about
Arvidsson as well, who's injured.
LA is the fact that they're well coached, but they're a team that plays the kids. They give the kids a chance. They put the kids in positions to develop. And this is a team that last year developed their players and made the playoffs and almost took the Edmonton Oilers out in game 7 to potentially go on to the second
They
round.
had Drew Doughty. I think they
Yeah.
would have done it.
And I think that kind of goes to show you where LA's at. I think this is a team that's going to take that next step this season and become a force. They've got so many good young players. I know Quentin Byfield hasn't lived up to the expectations yet. I think this season might be the year that he does it. Kaliev looks good, and I'm really excited about him. But I like their top 6. I think Kevin Fiala was a fantastic addition for them, and I think that he's going to take that team and become make them become a much better team. And also, their goaltending, Jonathan Quick last year was a revelation. Even their decor, I think LA got Sean Walker back this season, which they missed last year as well. So LA's a really going to be a really fun team to watch. And I think if Jonathan Quick and Cal Peterson can be consistent, they're going to be back in the mix. I'm going to say top 3 in the Pacific
Pacific.
again this year.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I agree with that too. And now moving on to our next team, a team that didn't really do much, but I think they're just underrated because of how successful they were last year, and that was the Nashville Predators. You have Ryan Johansson and Matt Duchene who finally live up to their contracts. Let's see if that's gonna be a continuous thing for years to come. Philip Forsberg, who resigns, he comes back. They add Nino Niederreiter, Tanner Janot, who came out of nowhere, and surprise, Cody Glass finally cracking an NHL roster. Eli Tollivan, who's playing on the fourth line, which I would assume he would eventually move up in the lineup, but like look how deep this team is. It's
Yeah.
just perfectly balanced in my
Yeah.
opinion. And you look
Yeah.
at their defense, Roman Yossi, who had a career year last year. They added Ryan McDonough. They lost Ryan Ellis and Subban, but they bring back a pivotal veteran presence in McDonough. Fabro, Lausanne, underrated. Carrier, underrated. And look at their power play too.
Yeah.
If they could repeat last year's success, they're going to be a playoff team, you know, in my eyes. And, their goalies, they bring in Kevin Lankinen, who had such a good first season with Chicago, but suffered last year. But everyone sucked on Chicago last year. And obviously, Yossi Saros, the most underrated goalie, in my opinion, in the NHL, a guy who deserves a lot more love if he was on a team that was, I don't know, more marketed, I guess, or more
Yeah.
mainstream, this guy would get a lot more love, like, Shesterkin and Vasilevsky. This team is an underrated team, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think Nashville, if there's, last year they had 24% of their power play. That's really good for a team like that. I think they're going to need Vezina goaltending from UC Saros, but I like Nashville's defense. I think Nashville's had a really good decor for the last couple of years, and I think they've never really taken a step back in that regard. Roman Yossi's a Norris winning defenseman too. They're a good team. And I think they're probably one of the most underrated teams in the league. Because I think a lot of, when you talk about the West, you talk about all the big teams like Vegas and Colorado and stuff, and Minnesota too to some extent. But I think Nashville's just up there with those teams, even St. Louis. And I think that Nashville this year, if Matt Duchene and Philip Forsberg and even guys like Nino Niederreiter, who they brought in, if these guys can take big step ups, and Tanner Jeannot as well, this is a team that's going to go into the playoffs and do some damage. I felt bad for them last year. I think they could have done better against last year in the playoffs, but unfortunately, it just wasn't meant to be. They didn't have their goaltending either, so it was unfortunate for them in that thumping against Colorado. But had they had UC Saros, I believe this team could have done a lot better, in my
Yeah, they,
opinion.
they could have stole a game or two, but they
Yeah,
still put up a fight against Colorado. And this team, I do it's so deep. I think, I mean, in the West side, in terms of like
yeah,
who's gonna make the playoffs. It's fairly gonna be similar to last year's standings. There's a lot of teams in the West that got severely worse, But Nashville's a team that kept it, pretty much the same as last year. Added in, one or two pieces, three pieces, nothing significant. So I see them, finishing in a wild card spot, but I think they're gonna finish first this year as opposed to second. I think they're gonna come in, a lot, stronger instead of like, peaking later on in the season. And our last team, a team that did not make the playoffs last year, that was hype, there was high promise, and that is the Vancouver Canucks. A lot of speculation for this team in terms of trade rumors. Is JT Miller going to be traded? Is Bo Horvat going to be traded? What's going on here? This team has Bruce Boudreau to start the season. So and they were very good under him. Yeah, they struggled a couple of times, but it was a lot better than how they were. With the older regime at the start of the season, they added Andrei Kuzmenko, who is coming from the KHL, who I expect, to do some damage. Connor Garland did not have, the best season last year. He came from Arizona. He did fairly well there. I was expecting better things, but I'm expecting him to be better this season. Tanner Pearson, not the best contract, but, he's on a team that, they're offensively gifted. Look at this team. It just deep everywhere. I'm pretty sure there's injuries because we're missing Elias
Brock Besser.
Pettersson here. Yeah, Brock Besser, Eli Mikheyev,
Ilya Mikheyev as
Travis
well.
Dermont.
And that's interesting with Vancouver because if you look at their team, right?
Pedersen's in the middle. Sorry, my
Yeah.
bad.
So if you look at their team, right, Horvat, Pedersen, Miller, I have a feeling they're going to change that up a little bit. But even just in that, Kuzmenko's a guy that's going to be interesting. Like you said, Connor Garland didn't have a good year last year. To me, one guy to pay attention to, Vasily Podkolzin. I think this is the year that he takes a step up. They brought in Mikheyev. Unfortunately, he's out for a little while. So when he comes back, he's going to be a solid addition. Brock Besser, who I expect big things from this season. Travis Dermott as well is another one that I really liked. If you go down to their decor, just to kind of see what they did, Quinn Hughes is going to take another step forward. I'm a big Jack Rathbone guy. I think this is the year that he takes a step up as well. I think
Too, I
Vancouver's
think, is
D.
underrated as well.
Yeah, but I think Vancouver's D is probably their weak point.
Yeah,
However,
it is.
when you have a goalie like Thatcher Demko in the net, you have a chance to win every night.
Look at this power play. Look how beautiful this is. Look at
Yeah,
that.
take Kuzmenko for Brock Besser, and you've got.
Look at that second power play unit. The only thing I'm not too crazy about is Oliver Ekman Larson, but it is what it is.
I would put Quinn
penalty-
Hughes on both power play units, honestly.
Look at this.
Like, honestly.
Spencer Martin, being a backup goalie. They had Halak last year. He didn't really work out.
Yeah.
And like we were saying, there was these injuries, to take into
Well,
consideration.
Spencer Martin, I'm not surprised that he's the backup. He had a really good year with the Abbotsford Canucks last year, and I remember because I went to some Rockets game in Laval for the Canadiens affiliate, and he would play against the Rocket, and he'd be this guy was making saves left, right, and center, and he was stopping. Like, he was just fantastic last year. So I'm not surprised that he got the jump up to be an NHL backup. I think he deserved it, and I think last year especially, he earned that backup role with just the way he played.
Yeah, and in terms of Jason Dickinson, there was a lot of like hype around him when he came from Dallas to Vancouver. It didn't work out last year, so hopefully it's better this year. Now as Hoglander, it started off well with him in Vancouver. Then after it got a little bit sour. So, we'll see what happens there. But, I think Vancouver is going to be a wild card team. The only thing that keeps them, down a little bit in the standings is their defense, primarily Tyler Myers and Oliver Ekman Larson. But, those are our underrated teams, essentially. We hope that you guys agree with, our picks. If we didn't mention any underrated teams in your opinion, make sure to write down in the comment section below. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this with any of the fan bases that we covered in terms of today's video. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Young Guns Podcast.
And I just want to say, guys, one last thing before we go. We didn't include Ottawa in this list because we think Ottawa is going to be a really good playoff team. So we don't put them as underrated, just in case anybody in the comments wanted to write why Ottawa is not in there. It's just because we already think that they're going to be contenders. So
exactly. And guys, we'll see you on the next episode, which will be covering our most overrated NHL teams heading into the 2022-2023 season. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Young Guns Podcast.